Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Teaching English webinars for teacher educators. This month, we will host Ahamefuna Agbo to explore effective working with teaching assistants. My name is Shirin Soyuz, and I'll be your moderator today. Thank you all so much for joining this live event. Before we start, I would like to share a number of quick housekeeping reminders with you. While waiting, please write in the Q&A where you are from. If you work in pre-service teacher education, type pre-service. If you work in service, type in service in the Q&A. You will have a chance to ask questions to our presenter during the session. Please use the Q&A to ask our presenter your questions. We will use the chats for announcements. And the link to the certificate will be provided in the thank you email that you will receive in the next couple of days. And finally, this session is being recorded, and the webinar recording will be available on Teaching English in the next couple of days. So let me introduce our guest today. Ahamefuna Agbo is a senior education program specialist in Nigeria with extensive experience across British Council programs in Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia. He has led inclusive initiatives for out-of-school and at-risk learners, including supporting over 5,000 learning facilitators in Nigeria. He currently leads the British Council's ILM-Pact Remedial Learning Program in Pakistan. So I'd like to invite Ahamefuna lead today's session. Hi, Ahamefuna.
Yes, thank you, Syrian. Thank you very much. So let me quickly share my screen. Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, from wherever you are joining from. And thank you for joining this today's session. Today, we'll be exploring the role of teaching assistants and what teacher educators especially need to know. Today's session is not about. I hope you can still see my screen.
Yes, Ahana. We can see it clearly. It's full screen.
Okay. Sorry, I'm still trying to. I want to hide this so I can see the screen properly.
If you like, I can also share it.
Okay. Today's session is going to be about the role of teaching assistants. But what we are here to discuss today is not about adding an additional adult in the classroom. We are here to discuss how we can make that additional adult more effective in teaching and learning. We agree that in most educational systems, teaching assistants or paraprofessionals already in existence. Sometimes they are recognized formally, or sometimes they are not recognized, like in SSA. And in some contexts, they are not present, they are not visible in policy, but very visible in practice in the classroom. So what we are going to be exploring today is what the role of teacher educators is shaping how these adults are prepared, supported, and integrated into teaching and learning. So for today, we will be looking at 4 areas. We'll be looking at discussing the existence or non-existence of teaching assistants. And we'll be drawing learning from across contexts. We'll be looking at what is happening in the UK, England, and then what obtains from Nigeria and Sub-Saharan Africa. In the UK, teaching assistants are formally part of the system, and they are well recognized, while in Nigeria and Sub-Saharan Africa, paraprofessionals exist, but they are not formally recognized. So what we are trying to do is not to compare contexts, but however, to try and draw learning from what is happening across the two contexts we are x-raying. So in particular, we'll be looking at professional development and support for teaching assistants, how teacher educators can become more involved in the professional development, and how teacher educators can help teachers to work more effectively with paraprofessionals, especially in relations to learners with special educational needs. So, why is this discussion important? Why does it matter? It matters because across the world, across various contexts, classrooms are changing faster than how teachers have been trained. Classrooms, the requirements, the workload on teachers is changing faster than how they have been prepared. Today, we see teachers working with learners with different ability levels. We see teachers working with children with special educational needs. Teachers are working with overaged and out-of-school learners returning to school. And then they're also working with, in some instances, in context of large class sizes, where they have limited resources, especially in the global south. So we can see from all this that it is obvious that teaching assistants or paraprofessionals have become part of how schooling works across contexts. They are supporting teachers to make classroom teaching and learning more effective. So all of this puts pressure on the teacher, and the aim is to see how we can make these teaching assistants to impact learning outcome better rather. So the question is not whether they exist, but whether their use is intentional, supported, and educationally sound. So that's what we'll be exploring today. Now, just a quick reality check. Before we go further, I would like us to ground this discussion on reality. But first of all, I would like us to define who a paraprofessional is. I want us to understand what a paraprofessional is. A paraprofessional is a trained support worker who assists a qualified professional to deliver services without holding full professional responsibility themselves. So it's someone that is trained as a support worker to assist a qualified, that's the key word, a qualified professional to deliver services. And another key word is that they don't hold professional responsibility. So if we bring that into the education context, the education sector, we can say a paraprofessional, for instance, a teaching assistant, is a trained adult who supports teaching and learning under a teacher's supervision without assuming full instructional responsibility. So when we say teaching assistant, volunteer, teaching aide, we are talking about somebody that is trained to support teaching and learning, but it does not hold instructional responsibility. So now, if I may ask, there's a poll that has popped up, which we would like you to respond to. We'll give you a minute to do that. In your context, do paraprofessionals already exist in some form? We have 4 options there. Option A is yes, they're formally recognized in the system. Yes, they exist informally, maybe as volunteers, aides, facilitators, or whatever name they call them in your context. Not really, or you are not sure. So whichever option you think is appropriate to your context, we'll give you a minute to respond. Great. Wow, so we can see that while they are formally recognized in most systems, we also have to appreciate the fact that they exist, but they are not recognized. So it's they exist informally. That's what the poll is telling us. So this tells us that teaching assistants exist in one form or the other. So the question now is, so at least this has established that they exist one way or the other, and it's not, they exist one way or the other, either formally or informally. So next, we'll take the next poll. It's just the second reality check. In one word or short phrase, what are paraprofessionals called in your context? So we have options there. Andre, if you can, yes. So you can select one of those options, or if you don't have any of that in your context, you can just write it down in the Q&A. So we'll give you a minute to respond to this too. What are paraprofessionals called in your context? Are they called volunteers? B, aides, teacher aides, facilitators. Youth Corps is particular to Nigeria. Graduates usually, after university, usually spend 1 year serving the country, the nation. So it's called National Youth Service. And the name for anyone serving the country is Youth Corps. They're also known as Youth Corps. So most times they are also deployed to schools to assist teachers or to teach. And then I think assistant teachers are common with private schools. So whichever one applies to your context, you select. So we have more of assistant teachers. Okay, 0 for youth. So youth corps is not common. Interesting. Volunteer is okay. So really, the important thing here is that they exist and they exist, and what they are called doesn't matter. But what matters is how their roles are designed. You know? So this is why teacher educators matter, designing the roles of these para-professionals, whether they are called volunteers, aides, facilitators, youth corpers, or assistant teachers. What are they doing in the classroom? What use are they in the classroom? How effective are they being utilized in the classroom? So what do teaching assistants do? We'll try to explore across UK and sub-Saharan Africa. In England, where teaching assistants are formally recognized, teaching assistants support small group and one-on-one learning interventions. We also support learners with special educational needs and learners that require social, emotional, and mental health support. They reinforce teacher instruction, and they also help to manage behavior and engagement. So in the aspect of behavior and engagement, which is very important, most times these teaching assistants have experience in managing certain conditions. And based on their experience with the learners, they're able to observe when a particular behavior is going to be triggered, and they are able to move in quickly and mitigate before it escalates and disrupts the whole class. So that way the teacher is able to focus on the instructional responsibility and make sure that the class continues seamlessly. So, so by and large, it's very clear that teaching assistants can only have a positive role in the classroom when their roles are well defined and they are trained, when they work in coordination with teachers. So what we want to also emphasize here is simply adding another adult to the classroom does not automatically improve learning. A lot of things have to happen before that adult is added to the classroom. So in SSA, if we look at Nigeria and Sub-Saharan Africa, teaching assistants support reading groups because of the learning crisis and the issues around education in our own context. They do more of supporting reading groups, managing large classes, because we have a situation where we have high pupil to teacher ratio. So you have one teacher probably managing a class of over 100. So in that context, a teaching assistant becomes very, very important if all the learners must access learning and must be engaged equally. And then they also support learners with disability, and they also help to fill teacher gaps. When, in terms of scaffolding learning during the class, because one teacher may not be able to go around the 100 people, so they're able to ensure that everyone is engaged, children are accessing what is being learned, what is being taught, and then that everybody is included in learning. And then again, yeah, sometimes they fill in the gap for teachers when they are absent. But then in this context also in Sub-Saharan Africa, these are paraprofessionals often operate without formal role recognitions and or rather a formal role definition. And then most times there is no structured pathway to their training. And so again, sometimes their supervision is not linked to pedagogy. So looking at both contexts, for UK has a formalized system for paraprofessionals, while SSA does not have. However, we also have the concern around status of paraprofessionals in the UK. So while we might say in England struggles with formalization without status, in Nigeria and SSA, we struggle with presence without formalization. So you see paraprofessionals in the classroom, but not formally recognized in policy. So what about professional development? What professional development exists for paraprofessionals? We would like to take a poll here. Let's learn from your own context too. What kind of training do paraprofessionals usually receive in your system? Formal training meaning structured pre-service training for paraprofessionals, pre-service and service training for paraprofessionals. Informal training meaning probably on-the-job training or based on challenges they face and they learn from it. And then project-based training, none. So project-based training is more or less when a donor or an NGO, a non-governmental organization, is supporting an education intervention. And during that period, they use project resources to train teaching assistants. Or maybe none exists. Great. So we have more of formal training. We have more of formal training. Very, very good. And then it's also important to recognize the informal and project-based trainings, which is where teaching assistants or rather teacher educators become very, very relevant in ensuring that the kind of training that teaching assistants get helps to support teaching and learning in the classroom. So in looking at UK, teaching assistants professional development is uneven. Most trainings happens on the job, and then access to structured continuous professional development varies widely. So most times, because of budget constraints, school leaders in the UK do not have a training budget for teaching assistants. Most training budgets are for teachers and other teachers and others in the teaching cadre. But for teaching assistants, most of them face the issue of training budget for that. So what they do mostly is to take advantage of free online trainings, or if they are able to organize in-house trainings, they do that. But there is no formalized, structured, policy recognized training or qualification that exists for teaching assistants. And then career progression is also a limitation for teaching assistants in the UK. There is no formalized transition into the teaching cadre. So as a teaching assistant, you with a lot of experience, the highest you can get to is the status of higher learning teaching assistant, where once you get to that level, you can oversight other teaching assistants, or you can be charged with a small group of learners, managing small group of learners. But taking up instructional responsibility is not part of it. So this is one limitation with in terms of professional development in the UK. However, in SSA, professional development comes through non-governmental organizations or donor programs, like I mentioned earlier. And learning is informal and practice-based. So most times it's modular. On the job, you are taught a particular topic and you go to the classroom and learn it. Or before the project starts, you are trained, and then mentors are assigned to support you throughout the period of the training. And what happens is that at the end of the training, at the end of the project, the training ends. So can see in both contexts, training is practically is not is uneven, is not coherent, and this is why we further emphasize the importance of teacher educators, especially in training teaching assistants in literacy, numeracy, and special educational needs support. So if this is done, it can significantly improve learner outcomes. So the core question we have for teacher educators is, if teaching assistants are supporting learning, who is responsible for preparing them to do so? This is a question I want to leave you with. It's a reflection question that I want you to take home with. It's food for thought. In your context, if teaching assistants exist and they are supporting learning, who is responsible for preparing them to do so? Now we're going to have another poll. And for the poll, we want to find out how involved are teacher educators currently in supporting or training paraprofessionals in your context. Are teacher educators involved directly? Are they leading the training? Do they provide informal mentoring? Is it limited or no involvement? Are they not involved at all? Or you are not sure? So just pick any of the options. So basically what we are trying to do here is, okay, directly lead training, good. Provide informal mentoring, limited or no involvement. Okay. So what we are trying to do here is not to, it's not a criticism at all. We are not trying to criticize, but we agree that in many systems, teaching assistants or paraprofessionals have expanded faster than the teacher education frameworks can adapt. So this is why teacher educators become important, and this is where they come in to be able to ensure that the teacher assistants are trained either informally, are trained and prepared to be in the classroom and to support learning adequately. So we'll pause here for a quick question and answer session, Q&A. I'll hand over to Sirin to facilitate the Q&A session. Over to you, Sirin.
Thank you, Ahamefuna. So yes, some questions and comments we have received. So I would like to start with the definitions. One of our participants asked, what are the qualifications for being a teaching assistant in Nigeria context? Maybe you can mention.
Yeah, in Nigeria, to be a teaching assistant, you be required, there's no formal qualification. I've already said in our context, there is no formal, in the teacher policy or in the Nigerian teacher policy, there is nothing about teacher assistants. But informally, the minimum requirement is post-secondary school qualification. It's post-secondary school qualification, yes. So once you are able to, you have that, you can support a teacher in the classroom. It's assumed that you can be able to support effectively and that you will be trainable too.
Okay, although they do not have teaching responsibilities, they don't have to have teaching qualification, and they can support the teacher. In what ways do they support the teacher? Can you give some examples of the kinds of responsibilities they have?
Okay, they can support teachers in ensuring engagement. For instance, in situations of a large class size, where one teacher is teaching over 100 pupils, it becomes difficult for the teacher to go around within the time period the teacher has for that lesson to ensure that every learner is engaged or involved and that learning is taking place. So they help the teacher to engage small groups or to carry out one-on-one interventions where a learner is lagging behind. They also help to manage disruptive behavior. With children, anything can happen. So they help the teacher to manage that. And then they carry out some other administrative tasks, preparing the classroom before learning. During lunch or breaks, they help support how the children play around or what they do during breaks and social activities. So yeah, that's what they do. But in terms of what is important is that they don't own the instruction that takes place in the class.
Okay, that's very unique role and maybe not exists in all contexts. One of our attendees also mentioned that in their context, they do have in-house training and workshops for them, but their role is quite challenging, from dealing with behavior to academic knowledge and administrative work. So perhaps it's also they have more work than maybe. Is that the case for you as well, that you have observed? So how can teacher educators, because teacher educators are in a mediator role, as far as I understand, they work with the teacher and teaching assistants in the school, right?
Yes.
To help them.
True. So that's what makes the role of teacher educator very imperative. Preparing the teacher and preparing the teaching assistants, because most times when teachers are trained, they are not trained to work as a team in the classroom. You are trained to take charge of a class, classroom management, inclusion and pedagogy and all. So if a teacher is not trained on how to work as a team or work with another adult or adults in the classroom, that coordination might be lacking. And instead of supporting or helping training, helping the class, it becomes an issue. So when you have two or three people at variance in purpose in the classroom, it may rather, instead of improving learning, it might become a limitation to learning taking place. So that's why teacher educators are important in defining the role of the teacher, the role of the teaching assistant, the role of every adult in the classroom. They are also important in defining their learning, the kind of training each and every, and then they're also important in defining the expectations. There are certain expectations we have for teachers. There are certain things we don't expect teaching assistants to do. So those kind of role definitions need to be clearly defined and become part of the training or learning that teaching assistants should have.
And what kind of skills should teaching assistants have?
Basically, skills around supporting children with special educational needs, skills around soft skills like relational skills, how to get a child to trust you and be confident, how to manage disruptive behavior. So communication skills, especially for kids. And then they also need to have skills in terms of delivering literacy and numeracy, not delivering per se, but supporting the delivery of numeracy and literacy classes.
Okay. And what is the biggest motivation for them for becoming a teacher assistant for them, intrinsic and extrinsically?
Most times it's altruistic, because even in some contexts, the status of teachers is not really appreciated, not to talk of teaching assistants. So, but we find most of them doing it because they want to support their children, they are members of the community, and they see that the teacher is overwhelmed. Some of them are probably retired teachers. They want to keep busy. So instead of staying at home, they could just go to the school and support the teacher in the community learning center or in the classroom, as the case may be. Most times it's just to give back. Not really, I cannot say it's because of the financial benefit, but of course we have some of them, that the younger ones that want to explore the possibility of transitioning from being a teacher assistant to becoming a teacher. They see it as a pathway to the teaching profession. So the motivation is depending on whom you are speaking to. It varies, so it could be altruistic. It could be because of you want to go into teaching profession. It could be because you are a parent and your child is in the school, so you want to be there to also keep an eye on your child if your child has a special need, as the case may be.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for your questions. So let's move on, and we will have another Q&A at the end of the session. So and we will be able to cover other areas as well. Thank you, Ahamefuna.
Thank you. So next we go to the key role of teacher educators. So the number one role of teacher educators is to design teaching assistants learning pathways. And what this means is that they should design training that is role specific, not some mini teacher training or micro teaching. No, the training should be specific to what the teaching assistants should know, what they should be able to do, and what they should not be expected to do. Then the training should be modular and practice-based. It should be hands-on, such that they don't overload the teaching assistants, that as soon as mixing theory and practice at the same time. And then they should ensure that training is linked to curriculum and pedagogy, because as a teaching assistant, you should be able to understand what the teacher is doing, to know when to intervene when a learner or a child is lagging behind. So effective training basically should focus on supporting literacy and numeracy, like I mentioned earlier, special educational needs strategies. It should focus on behavior and engagement, how to manage behavior and engagement. And it should also promote learner independence. So we don't want a learner or a child to be attached to the teaching assistant, and it now becomes a problem when the teaching assistant is not there. The child is not able to carry out any task. So training should also focus on how to promote learner independence. The second role of teacher educators, which we are highlighting today, is preparing teachers to work with teaching assistants. So just like I said earlier, if teachers are trained alone but expected to teach in teams, teacher education is incomplete. So teacher educators can help teachers learn how to plan with teaching assistants, co-plan lessons. When you are doing your lesson planning before you enter the classroom, you can spend 15 minutes before the class at least with the teaching assistants to plan how the class is going to look like, and agree on the outcomes and activities that will take place. Also, teacher educators also need to help teachers to learn how to allocate instructional tasks. So there are situations where teaching assistants take up instructional tasks, and sometimes what they are doing is at variance with what the teacher is doing. So that shouldn't be the case. There should be clear task allocation. This is what I want you to do during this particular lesson to support what the learning outcome I'm trying to achieve. And then they should also prepare teachers on how to avoid dependency, what we call the Velcro effect. So this is what I explained earlier, where a situation where a learner depends so much on the teaching assistants, where that attachment takes place and the learner is not able to do anything without the aid of the teaching assistants. So these three key areas we expect teaching assistants to, or rather teacher educators, to help prepare teachers to work with TAs. And now the last role we are highlighting three today is in terms of special educational needs and inclusive education. So teaching assistants are especially important for this. And evidence warns us that if teacher assistants are poorly deployed, it can increase dependency. So we've highlighted this in the previous roles we mentioned, and this can unintentionally isolate learners. So instead of helping the learner, you are now isolating the learner. Others are learning while a learner that's now dependent on the teaching assistant can do nothing without the teaching assistant. So what we are saying in essence is that teacher educators must ensure special educational needs strategies are part of the teaching assistants learning. They must ensure that teachers retain instructional responsibility and that teaching assistants support access and independence. So before we wrap up, it is important to highlight that having a teaching assistant or a paraprofessional or an additional adult in the classroom does not make the classroom inclusive by default. Inclusion is designed, is not accidental. So in certain contexts, we say we want to make sure that we ensure inclusive education and we add more adults in the classroom, but that's not the case. The truth is that if you don't prepare these adults very well, if you don't train them, if you don't give them the necessary support, if they are not integrated properly, if teachers are not prepared on how to work with them, then we might rather be promoting exclusion rather than promoting inclusion. So what this means for you as a teacher educator is I'm going to be leaving these 3 questions for you to take home. What role do paraprofessionals play in your system? What role do paraprofessionals play in your system? And then we also want you to reflect on how are they trained? How are paraprofessionals trained in your system? And how can you as a teacher educator be more involved in their training and in their professional development? So please note these questions. We are going to, it's food for thought for you as we wrap up today's session. But again, just to surface some of the challenges you might face, because as you go back to your various schools or stations, we're not saying that it's going to be easy. It's important to highlight that it's not going to be easy, and that in doing all of this, you are going to probably face some challenges. So what we want to ask is, what is the hardest part of integrating paraprofessionals, or what is the hardest part? What do you think would be the hardest part for you to advocate for the integration of paraprofessionals into classroom teaching in your context? What do you think? You can put some in the Q&A if you can think of. We have highlighted some here. We expect some of the challenges you might face to include role confusion. So in some contexts, we see that teaching assistants report to so many people. They report to the head teacher or the school leader. In some contexts, there are what we call special educational needs coordinator, who assigns teaching assistants to classrooms or teachers. The TA reports to the SENCO. The TA also reports to the teacher and other administrators in the school. So as a teaching assistant, trying to now define the role of as a teacher educator, trying to now define the role of a teaching assistant, you need to be mindful of this. If various colleagues have the roles for the teaching assistant, how do you define what the teaching assistant should do, and how do you coordinate this to make sure that it's motivating for the teaching assistant? And then there is power dynamics. Just like I mentioned, if the teaching assistant is reporting to so many people, then there's that issue around whom do I respond to first, or who do I give priority most? So it's something you need to also be mindful of to help define what the teaching assistants should do and how they should work and the expectations for them. And then you might encounter lack of planning time, teachers saying they don't have time to sit down and plan with or co-plan with a teaching assistant. Then you might encounter challenge of policy. It could be that in your context, there is no policy or no regulation or no legitimate support for teaching assistants. So you have to look around you have to look at how to work around this to ensure that their use in teaching and learning is productive. And then the issue around Velcro effect, dependency is what you also need to look at. Sometimes we have instances where in some schools, parents contribute to have a teaching assistant in the school. So teaching assistant might pay more attention to learners that the parents are paying for their service, which can also create some kind of dependency issue. And then teacher resistance too. It's not uncommon that if it's a new idea in your context, generally people, and you want to create, bring in a change by ensuring teacher assistants properly integrated. Teachers might resist what you want to do. They might resist the change or the improvement you want to bring into the system. So these are just a few that I have put in the slide. There are more that you are most likely going to encounter. But just to surface this for your attention and for you to know that it's not going to be easy for you as a teacher, educator, to come up with, to implement the plan of supporting and integrating teacher assistants or paraprofessionals properly. And then in closing, we have highlighted that paraprofessionals or teaching assistants already exist across systems, and their impact depends on preparation and coordination. So in some systems, they exist formally. In other systems, they exist informally. We have also seen that from our poll. What determines their impact is not their presence, but how intentionally they are prepared and deployed. So evidence has already shown us that when roles are unclear, the training is ad hoc. We do impromptu trainings, and coordination with teachers is weak. Then teaching assistants might unintentionally be limiting learning. So what is important is that roles are clearly defined. Training is purposeful. What we train them is purposeful, and that we ensure that there's collaboration and coordination between the teachers and the assistants they work with. So when this happens, definitely it will significantly strengthen inclusion, engagement, and learning, particularly for learners with special educational needs. So this is where teacher educators matter, defining these roles, defining the training pathways, and ensuring proper inclusion is taking place. So teacher educators shape how teachers think about collaboration and how classrooms are staffed and how responsibility for learning is shared. So if teachers are trained alone, and just like we said, expected to work in teams, then teacher education is incomplete. This is what we want you to take home. I'll leave you with one final question to carry forward into your own work. As you go back, what is that one small practical change you could make in what you teach, model, or legitimize to better support the adults who support learning in your context? So what is that small practical change you implement when you go back to your work in supporting learning, especially for teaching assistants? So thank you very much. I'll close here and I'll hand over to Siri for the Q&A, next Q&A session. Over to you, Siri.
Thank you so much, Ahamefuna. So it was a very um, interesting from a context where I haven't met any teaching assistants. I can see that there is a lot of potential here, but also lots of challenges. One of our challenges when the main teacher is way too strict for the children, then teaching assistants is more on soft caring role in the class. This is another challenging one. Have you encountered such challenges about how they approach or how they are perceived by the learners in the classroom?
Come again, I missed that question. Sorry, I think the network dropped a little.
Okay, so when the main teacher is too strict for the children, and when teaching assistant is more on soft caring role in the class, this is another challenging time. So one of our attendees mentioned. Have you observed such challenges in terms of their
Yes.
presence in the classroom?
So that's what leads to what we call Velcro effect, the dependency, because the teacher is strict, the teaching assistant is soft, and then the learner gets attached, prefers to go to the teaching assistant. But what is important here is that the teacher is in charge of the instruction, takes instructional responsibility, and ensures that what the teaching assistant is doing aligns to the tasks that they have been assigned. I think teachers too should be trained on how to recognize this, such that you know how to, you can reassign the teaching assistant to another child and take up, engagement with the child that is getting too attached to avoid that kind of dependency issue. So yes, it happens, but the onus is on the teacher to observe this and take action to ensure we avoid dependency. So that is where teaching assistants, teacher educators come into play, because you have to train the teachers to be able to recognize it, and you have to train them on what to do when they observe something like that.
Okay. So a challenging job for the teacher educator as well. And what do teaching assistants feel is the most challenging part of their role in the context covered? Is there any research on this? So about how they feel, have you talked to them, or have you read any research around this, how they see their role and how they feel about their role? This is a question.
Yes, most of them feel that what they do is not well appreciated. And really, sincerely, they do a lot. If you see what teaching assistants do, even the teachers will tell you, I wouldn't have coped without the teaching assistants. In short, there is even the issue of dependency, the teacher becoming too dependent on the teaching assistant, such that if the teaching assistant is not coming to school that day, it becomes difficult for the teacher to function. So teaching assistants some of them feel that their role is not well appreciated, not well valued. They do a lot, but what they do is not valued. And then some of them feel that with what they do, there should be opportunity for them to be able to transit into proper teaching cadre. So, and yeah, in a program we did in Nigeria, which was led by the British Council, the Kalma project, we worked with about 5,000 teaching assistants or facilitators whom we trained. And because of the motivation and enthusiasm they had at the end of the project and what the government saw, their impact in children's learning, the government immediately, the Kano State government immediately absorbed all of them. So just to show that, yes, their value is very, very important. And it's also important that as teacher educators, we try to advocate for opportunities for them to also transit. It's not compulsory. It's not every teaching assistant that wants to teach. Some are doing it just, people have several reasons. Maybe you don't want to be idle, so you want to help the children in your community. People want to do it voluntarily. So it's not everyone. So even in trying to onboard them into the teaching cadre, you also have to be mindful of what they want. It should be optional, you know. So just to X-ray and share that case study.
And do all teachers have teaching assistants, or does it depend on the level of support they need?
In many schools, there are no teaching assistants, sincerely. So in our context, most times where you find them is because a project is sponsoring them or a donor sponsoring the activity. You may find them in private schools. Yes, most private schools have teaching assistants or assistant teachers, but in public schools, in SSA, you hardly find teaching assistant because again, we have a shortage of, in SSA, for instance, there's a shortage. We need about 15 million teachers to be, role of teachers to be filled by 2030. In Nigeria alone, we are supposed to fill over 200,000 teaching roles by 2030. So once you are able to manage children to an extent, you become a teacher. You know, even if it's informally, or even if it's not recognized in the teachers policy, national teachers policy. So in our context, teaching assistants are not common. Not every teacher has an assistant.
Okay. And you also mentioned that they support inclusive classrooms. So another question, especially learners with different learning needs.
Exactly.
What kind of support do they provide to those learners?
So when we were implementing the CALMA project, we had a number of schools that we call single teacher, head teacher school. So you have just one teacher with over 400 learners, primary 1, 2, 3, and only one person is catering. You know, so what we normally do is we look at graduates or community members of the community that have post-secondary education. We train them, give them all the necessary pedagogical training and everything they need to know to now join the single teacher and support that teacher in the classroom. You know, it's impossible for one teacher to manage 6 arms of primary school and still be the head teacher. So in most of those contexts, that's where we see teaching assistants as very, very, very important to ensuring inclusion or access to education. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And another question, are there also multilingual support responsibilities if students' mother tongue is not the dominant language in that context, both in SSA and in the UK?
I don't know about the UK, but in Nigeria, the language, National Education Language Policy promotes L1, the mother tongue, as the language of learning from primary 1 to primary 3. And then, so most times those teachers are already indigenes of the community. They speak the same language. So they use mother tongue to teach. So, and gradually they scaffold into English, and then the child starts learning a second language. So in our program too, which I would like to also highlight, I would like you guys to also try and search on British Council website, CALMA. We have a lot of policy documents we put out there on what we did. you see what we call dual language approach, where we use the mother tongue as a scaffold for learning English. So it's something that we piloted in Nigeria, and today we are also doing same in Pakistan as part of the Impact project.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, that would be great. We can also put that link to your webinar page. And yes, the common question is, how can teaching assistants help students without undermining the teacher's role? So this is actually maybe part of the training that you provided and the induction. And the question I have in mind, what happens if there is no teacher educator? So I mean, this is a project, right? There were teacher educators, but if teaching assistants work with the teacher and if there is no teacher educator, or are there teacher educators with that experience? Because they also need some experience and training about this, right? So it's just not something we have perhaps experienced before. So helping those, role allocation and monitoring and other dynamic.
So the question we'll ask is, who is a teacher educator? So I think teacher educator must not be the middle tier person in the educational sector in your environment. The principal, the school leader, the head teacher should have own instructional leadership. School leadership is not just administrative. It also involves what happens in the classroom. So the school leader or the head teacher can also be the teacher educator. Except now, if you talk about the context of single teacher, that's a very peculiar case. But if you are a school leader, a head teacher, you have teachers, I think you should take up the responsibility of a mentor. We expect school leaders or head teachers to also be school mentors. The cluster mentor must not come to the school before something like this happens. Of course, you can, and again, because of paucity of resources, we may not have enough cluster mentors to cover the schools properly. So that's where school-based mentors become very important. Even senior teachers too can also take up that role.
Yeah, that's so true. So there was also another comment close to this. So it's a position that educational leaders really need to know how to develop it, as it's highly required in all education system. So it's also from teacher educators or school leaders' point of view, a leadership role, but also for teachers and teaching assistants work together. There are so many important considerations. And you also mentioned that the learning pathway for teaching assistants needs to remain practice focused rather than becoming mini teacher training. Can you tell us more about this? So how do you make this process practice focused?
Okay, so we are looking at not repeating what you have taught the teachers. No, that's not what we're looking at. The role that has been defined for the teacher assistant, that support role. So it should not, the training should not run in parallel. Rather, it should be linked to what the teacher is supposed to do. It's like a plane, a commercial plane. We have the captain and then we have the co-pilot. So the co-pilot, number one, should understand what the pilot is doing. So the pilot directs the co-pilot to pull that lever, press that button. So the pilot assigns tasks to the co-pilot, and the co-pilot needs to understand what the pilot is doing to be able to support the pilot at any point in time. And then again, if co-pilot understands that the pilot is the captain, he's in charge of the plane. So In terms of instructional leadership in the classroom, there should be no confusion about that. The teacher is in charge. The teaching assistant is there to support. But it's important that the teaching assistant understands what the teacher is doing so that the teaching assistant will be able to support very well.
That's a very nice example and analogy. So another one, are these positions mainly suitable for retired people with time on their hands and perhaps as a second family income rather than individual professional career choice in many contexts? If so, will lack of status or demand affect the effectiveness of the role and retention? So from that, if that's the case, how can policy improve the situation? So long question, but yes, about how they perceive this role and yeah, from your experience.
Yeah, most times in our context, the role could be voluntary, where someone wants to pass time, just like you said, a retired teacher or a retired professional goes to the school to support a community, or just you want to help your community. And then there are those that, because of the huge employment gap, they are not able to find other jobs, but there is an opportunity for you to help in a school and a stipend will be paid. The person would rather be busy with that than to stay at home and be idle and do nothing. But that said, in terms of policy, what policy should be looking at is we appreciate we're not saying looking at cheap labor. No, that's not what we are saying. What we are saying is to value what the teaching assistant brings to the school, brings to the classroom, and what they bring to the learner, and trying to make sure that we formalize that role. Because the risk is that if there is no policy, then anything can happen. If you don't structure it, then you are leaving it to all kinds of manner of you are leaving all kinds of manner of things to happen in the classroom. But if there is a policy directing behavior, directing role, directing what teaching assistants should and should not do, then the learner is protected, because at the end of the day, everything you are doing is to ensure that you improve learning in the classroom. So policy should try and protect the learner. It also helps safeguarding and all. Should not allow policy should also dictate who becomes a teaching assistant, not anybody, for the safety of the child.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, all of these are really eye-opening. And is there any growth in this role? Another question about teaching assistants.
Growth in terms of career, yes, just like the example I gave, we have seen facilitators or teaching assistants transit into becoming full-time teachers after they've led teaching and learning for a long time, and the system is confident that yes, they've gained the experience. So it also helps the system, because instead of giving them that long, expensive training, with the experience they have, they can now do a purposeful training to prepare them properly to take charge of a classroom. So yes, we have seen that kind of transition, and we have also seen where young youths that initially did not think of the teaching profession, after helping in the classroom, became enthusiastic about helping children, and they went into the teaching profession. So yes, we have seen that kind of progression and growth.
Thank you. One final question. How can teacher education programs better prepare teachers to plan and work with teaching assistants? So yes, this is let's wrap it up closely.
Yeah, teacher education programs should first of all ensure that a learning pathway is properly designed, or a learning plan is properly designed for teaching assistants. Then teacher education programs should also be mindful of the fact that teachers in the first instance are not prepared. Most teacher training schools do not train teachers to work in teams in the classroom. Teacher is expected to work with the children. So when you need to have another adult in the classroom, teachers need to be prepared on how to work as a team. So you should be prepared on how to communicate, because improper communication, coordination will create incoherence, and exacerbates what is already there. So that coordination, communication, and collaboration with the teaching assistant is very important. So we need to teach that. We also need to teach how to manage special educational needs learners, and how to be more inclusive in engaging the children. So I think these are the three core that teacher education systems should be mindful of.
Thank you.
Teachers for this, yes.
Yes, so I agree with you, Ahamefuna, also especially this co-regulation between teachers, and these are really important skills for teachers. Thank you so much. It's been really a very valuable experience. I mean, in terms of your examples and all the knowledge that you have, all the insights that you have provided. Thank you once again. We hope everyone, yes, you have also found the session useful and picked up some useful ideas to reflect on in your current context. So just to remind you, the recording of the webinar will be available on Teaching English in the next couple of days, and the link to the certificate will be provided in the thank you email that you'll receive this week. And please share your feedback with us. You will see the feedback form in the chat, and don't forget to subscribe to our monthly newsletter for teacher educators, and finally register for our next webinar, which will be a review webinar, and it will be on 19th of March. So we very much hope to see you all again in the future session, and thank you so much once again, Ahamefuna, for all the important messages you have shared, and it was really eye-opening, and we hope we will host you again in another session in the future. And we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.